Keys beneath the keys. If you're watching this, you already know I'm not supposed to be talking. My name is Father Elias Moretti, or it was. 12 years ago, I still wore the black cassock without thinking twice, still believed the collar was armor. I was 38 then, fresh out of the Gregorian with a doctorate in paleography and a reputation for being able to read Latin so badly degraded that most scholars called it noise. That reputation was why they came for me. It happened the way these things always do in the Vatican, quietly, politely, and with the weight of centuries behind the smile. One October evening in 2013, after Vespers, a Swiss guard I didn't recognize appeared at the door of my tiny apartment near Piazza di San Callisto. No insignia on his civilian jacket, just the way he held himself, spine straight, eyes scanning corners that didn't need scanning. He handed me an envelope the color of old bone. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, no crest, only a time, 22:30, and an address I knew better than my own childhood home, the entrance to the Archivio Apostolico Vaticano under the Cortile della Pina. I almost threw it away. I'd applied for normal access months earlier and been ignored like everyone else. But something about the paper felt warm, as if it had been held too long in someone's hand. I went. They met me in the reading room everyone knows from the photographs, the one with the wooden tables and the soft lamps that make the manuscripts glow like sleeping animals. Two men. One was Monsignor Giuseppe Ricci, prefect of the archive, thin as a ruler, eyes the color of wet ash. The other I recognized from ordination photos, Cardinal Angelo Moretti, no relation, though the shared surname would become a running joke inside the walls until it stopped being funny. They didn't offer me coffee. They didn't waste time. "You have a gift for damaged text," Ricci said in Italian, so precise it felt translated from Latin. "We have texts that are more than damaged. They are unwilling." The cardinal never spoke. He simply placed a small iron key on the table between us. Not ornate, no papal insignia, just cold, black metal, heavier than it should have been. It looked medieval, the kind of key that once locked something people later decided should stay locked. Level black, Ricci continued. 40 meters below where we sit, climate controlled, negative pressure, no natural light. Even most of the College of Cardinals believes the lowest level is storage for Renaissance tax records. He smiled the way a surgeon smiles before the incision. They are mistaken. I should have asked questions. Instead, I heard myself say yes. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the same hunger that makes a diver drop into black water just to hear how quiet the world can get. They didn't make me sign anything that night. The oath came later, in a room without corners. The descent begins behind a false panel in the Tower of Winds, down an elevator that officially doesn't exist. You step inside what looks like a 1950s freight cage, the kind that once carried crates of incunabula. The doors close with a sigh that sounds almost relieved. Then it drops, slowly at first, then faster, the cables singing a single low note that vibrates in your teeth. 40 meters, less than the height of the obelisk in St. Peter's Square, but enough to feel the weight of the city change above you. The air grows colder, drier, smelling faintly of myrrh and ozone from the dehumidifiers that run 24 hours a day. When the doors open, you're in a corridor cut from volcanic tufa. the walls still bearing the pick marks of prisoners who dug it under Pope Urban VIII. Motion sensors wake soft LED strips the color of candlelight. No shadows jump. Everything is designed to keep shadows tame. There are no windows, no signs, only a brass plaque in Latin, non intratur nisi per mortem sui. You do not enter except through the death of yourself. I thought it was poetic the first time. Later, I understood it was instructions. My office, if you can call a vaulted cell 10 feet by 12, an office, was at the end of corridor 7, steel desk, ultraviolet lamps, a microscope most museums would kill for, and a red telephone with no dial. The phone only receives calls. It rings downward. Someone once joked, and nobody laughed. They gave me 3 rules the first day. 1. Work alone after 22. 2. Never remove anything larger than a photographic negative. 3. If you begin bleeding from the eyes, nose, or ears, do not wipe it on the documents. Use the silver basin provided. I laughed at that last one. Ricci didn't. For the first year, it was almost academic. I restored 9th century papal bulls eaten by worms, deciphered marginalia in copies of the Liber Diurnus that contradicted every textbook I'd ever read, photographed Greek palimpsests under multispectral imaging until my retinas burned. The strange things were small then, pages that felt warmer than the ambient 18 degrees Celsius, ink that crawled a millimeter when you looked away, the faint smell of lilacs in rooms where no flowers had been for 400 years. Then came the night they left me with Codex Umbrae 17. It was February, the deadest part of a Roman winter. I'd been alone since Compline. The silence so complete I could hear the blood moving in my ears. At 02:47, the red phone rang once, just once, and went dead. That was the signal. I walked to the main vault, punched my code into a door that looks like a bank safe, and took the elevator 1 level deeper than I'd ever been allowed. The chamber was smaller than I expected, circular, maybe 6 meters across, with a single table under a surgical light. On the table lay a book bound in dark wood and what might once have been human skin, pale, hairless, stretched so tight you could see the grain of the boards beneath. No title on the spine, no clasps, only a wax seal the color of dried blood, stamped with a key turned backward. Ricci's voice came over the intercom, thin and metallic. Begin with folio 23 recto, translate aloud. The microphones are listening. I broke the seal. The wax cracked like a knuckle. The page was vellum, but thicker than any calfskin I'd ever handled, almost waxy. The script underneath the later text was scratched in with something sharper than a stylus, letters that looked flayed rather than written. Under ultraviolet, the overtext vanished, and the original emerged, a language that wasn't quite Latin, wasn't quite Hebrew, wasn't quite anything human, but I could read it. That was the first wrong thing. I'd never seen these characters before, yet the words slid into my mind fully formed. I started reading aloud as ordered. In the year when the Tiber ran black with the blood of the innocents, the angel who beholds the face of God turned away, and his countenance was seen by Theophilus chapter 2, the 4th century palimpsest, the first time the codex bled on me. I thought it was my own fault. It was late March. The kind of Roman night where the tramontana wind slips down from the Alps and makes the city feel suddenly ancient again. I had been alone in the sub-vault for 9 hours straight. No food, only black coffee from the thermos the Swiss guards leave outside the elevator like an offering. My eyes burned from the UV lamps. The air recyclers hummed at 18 degrees, but I was sweating through the cassock anyway. Codex Umbris at 17 lay open under the black light. Folio 23 recto glowing the color of a corpse's lips. The overtext, some 8th century monk's tedious commentary on the Gospel of Mark, had faded to nothing under ultraviolet, exactly as expected. Palimpsests do that. You scrape off an old text because vellum is expensive. You write something new on top. Centuries later, the new ink degrades faster than the old, and the ghost underneath comes back. Standard paleography. I had done it 100 times. But this ghost didn't whisper. It screamed. The undertext emerged in strokes so thin they looked carved rather than written. Letters that hurt to follow because the eye wants to read them left to right, and they refuse. They twist. They reverse mid-word. I adjusted the magnification on the stereoscope and felt the first real chill. The script predated classical Latin by centuries. It used letter forms I recognized only from the Duenos inscription, and a handful of Faliscan shards no one agrees how to read. Whoever wrote this had done it before Rome was anything more than a sheep track across 7 hills. I began transliterating aloud, because that's what they trained me to do. Sound shapes memory. Faciem avertit angelus al qui stat in conspectu Dei, et vidit facem suam in speculo aeterno, et facem suam aversam vidit, et non erat lumen in ea, sed tenebrae quae palpare possunt. The angel who stands before the face of God turned away, and he beheld his own face in the eternal mirror, and he saw his face turned backwards, and there was no light in it, only darkness that can be touched. I stopped. My Latin is fluent, but this wasn't Latin the way the church speaks it. This was Latin before the church decided what Latin was allowed to mean. The sentence structure crawled like something with too many joints. I leaned closer. The vellum smelled wrong, not the usual dry, peppery scent of old calfskin, but something coppery underneath, like a butcher's block left in the sun. I thought, I'm tired. I'm imagining it. Then the drop hit the page. It came from my left nostril without warning, warm and sudden. I felt it slide over my upper lip before I saw it. A single bead of blood, dark as garnet, falling in perfect slow motion under the UV. It struck the center of the folio with a sound I shouldn't have been able to hear, in negative pressure silence, and nothing happened. The blood didn't spread. It didn't soak in. It sat there, a perfect sphere, trembling slightly as if the page were breathing. I watched it for 5 full seconds, maybe 10, then it rolled by itself toward the margin, following the slope of a letter that looked like a backwards capital lambda. When it reached the edge, it simply vanished, as if the vellum had inhaled it. I jerked back so hard the stool toppled. My heart was hammering against the Roman collar like it wanted out. I touched my nose, more blood, now flowing freely, dripping onto the steel desk, onto my lap, onto the floor where it finally behaved like normal blood, and spread, but not on the page. The page stayed pristine. I grabbed the silver basin they keep under every workstation for exactly this contingency. The rules flashed through my head in Ricci's dry voice. If you begin bleeding, do not wipe it on the documents. I pressed a linen cloth to my face. The bleeding stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only the taste of iron and the faint smell of ozone. The intercom crackled, Ricci's voice, calm as ever. Are you injured, Father Elias? I stared at the ceiling where the microphone hid behind a brass grate shaped like a papal tiara. No, I lied. Dust, old books, a pause. Continue. The transcription must be complete before lauds. The line went dead. I righted the stool with shaking hands. Under the UV, the undertext had shifted again. New lines had appeared where none had been 30 seconds earlier, or maybe I had simply not seen them. Ink doesn't appear. I know that. But these letters looked wet, as if freshly scratched. I kept reading. The ritual that followed was not a prayer. It was instructions. How to summon the angel who turned away. How to make him turn back. How to look upon the face that should never be seen from behind. The materials were specific. Soil taken from a grave, opened on the third day after burial. A mirror forged from metal, fallen from the sky. Meteoritic iron. 7 locks of hair from 7 different popes, cut while they still lived. And blood, always blood, but not just any blood. Sanguis scribentis, ipsa sufficit. It said, the blood of the scribe himself is sufficient. I laughed then. A short, ugly sound that echoed off the tufa walls. Coincidence? Old texts love blood symbolism. The Aztecs, the Cathars, every medieval grimoire, it's always blood. I told myself that. I told myself a lot of things in those days. I finished the transcription at 04:13 a.m., 47 lines in total, when I turned the page to folio 23 verso. The overtext was back, perfect 8th century Caroline minuscule, discussing the feeding of the 5,000. No trace of bleeding, no trace of anything. I closed the codex. The wax seal had reformed, not melted and reset, reformed, smooth as the day I broke it. I stared at it until the surgical light began to hurt. Upstairs. Dawn was breaking over the dome of St. Peter's. I could hear the bells for lauds starting their slow climb through the scale. I took the elevator alone. In the mirrored wall of the cage, I caught my reflection, and for a split second, the face looking back at me was not tired, not pale, not mine. It was smiling with the wrong side of its mouth. I blinked, and it was gone. That was the first night the angel with the backwards face let me know he had noticed me reading. There would be others, many others, and every time I bled on the page after that. The vellum drank it like it was starving. Chapter 3. The Regensburg Incident of 2009. I didn't mean to find the cassettes. In our world, curiosity is supposed to be a virtue. Down there, it's a slow-acting poison. It started with a routine inventory cross-check. Level Black holds more than forbidden books. It holds the residue of the people who read them. Every archivist leaves a personal locker, fireproof, biometric, meant for notes, rosaries, the occasional bottle of grappa when the nights get too long, when someone dies or disappears. The locker is supposed to be emptied by the prefect's office and the contents incinerated. Protocol, clean lines. The Vatican is very good at clean lines. Monsignor Johann Regensburg's locker had never been cleared. He died in September 2009. I remember the memo because it came the same week Benedict XVI made his controversial speech about faith and reason in Regensburg. It was Germany, Johann's hometown. The coincidence stuck in my head. The official cause was myocardial infarction. Alone at his desk at 03:14 a.m., they found him face down on an open folio of Codex Umbrae 17, the same page I had bled on months earlier. The photograph they circulated internally showed a thin line of blood from his left ear, perfectly symmetrical, like a red tear. The coroner noted spontaneous bilateral autoragia, which is medical Latin, for we have no idea why both eardrums exploded at once. I was still new enough then that death felt distant, academic. I signed the condolence book, attended the requiem in the Teutonic cemetery, and forgot about him the way you forget minor characters in someone else's story. Until the locker started clicking. It happened during a full system backup, 48 hours when the climate controls drop 2 degrees to prevent condensation on the vellum. The lower corridors get so cold, your breath hangs like incense. I was walking corridor 9 with a halogen torch because the LEDs flicker when the servers pull power. At locker 47, Regensburg's, the magnetic seal was cycling open and closed on its own. A soft metallic cough every 7 seconds exactly. Click, 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 like a tongue against teeth. I should have reported it. Instead, I put my thumb on the plate. The lock recognized the override code, all level black personnel share for emergencies. The door sighed open. Inside was everything you'd expect from a German scholar priest, a spare pair of spectacles, a dog-eared copy of Rahner's Foundations, a small vial of Lord's water, and a stack of 9 Maxell UR90 cassettes in a plastic bag labeled in careful black marker. Für die Nachwelt, nicht öffnen bis 2014. For posterity, do not open until 2049. The year of his death plus 40, a nice biblical number. I took the bags. That night I sat in my cell above ground because some instincts are stronger than rules, and fed the first tape into a Walkman I'd owned since seminary. The quality was terrible, hiss and warble, but Johann's voice came through clear, calm, the faint Bavarian lilt that always made his Latin sound warmer than it had any right to. Tape 1, 12, March 2009. They tell you the silence down here is perfect. It isn't. There are frequencies the human ear forgets it can hear. Tonight I caught one. A whisper at 18 hertz. Infrasound. It makes the sternum vibrate like a second heart. I thought it was the ventilation at first. Then the whisper shaped itself into a word. Not Italian, not Latin, something older. It said my name backwards, twice. I stopped the tape, rewound, played again. The whisper was there, buried under the hiss like a radio station bleeding through from another dimension. I turned the volume all the way up and felt my teeth buzz. Tape 2, 28th or April 2009. The mirrors are wrong. There are only 3 in the entire level. Safety glass in the bathrooms. Required by some EU regulation no one dared argue with the Holy See about. I counted reflections today. There should be one of me. There were 2. The second one was half a second behind. When I raised my right hand, it raised its left. When I smiled, it didn't. It simply opened its mouth wider than bone allows and waited. Tape 3, 19 May 2009. I left my rosary on the desk last night. This morning the beads had been rearranged, not scattered, rearranged. They spelled a word in Aramaic on the blotter: Thevom, Tehom, the deep, the primordial abyss from Genesis 1:2, before God separated light from dark. Someone, or something, wanted me to know it can read. The tapes grew shorter as the dates grew closer together. His breathing became audible between sentences, shallow, the way people breathe when they're trying not to cry on a phone call. Tape 603, August 2009. The voices have started answering questions I only think. Today I wondered silently whether the angel with the backwards face was ever one of the named choirs. Seraphim? Cherubim? The reply came from the empty reading room behind me. A single sentence in Koine Greek. We were before the thrones. Then the lights dimmed, though the power gauge read steady. I turned around. Nothing, but the chair opposite mine was warm. Tape 8, 01, September 2009. I tried to tell Ricci. He listened the way a man listens to a child describing an imaginary friend. Polite, distant, already writing the transfer papers in his head. He reminded me of the oath. He reminded me of obedience. Then he said something I will never forget. Some doors, Johann, are locked from the inside. The final tape was labeled only with a date, 14th of September 2009, the day he died. It began with the sound of a chair scraping back, footsteps, the soft click of the cassette recorder being placed on the desk, then Johann's voice, no longer calm, raw, terrified. They're in the mirrors now, not reflections, the things themselves, watching, waiting for me to turn my back completely. I can feel the moment coming when my face will finally match the one I've been reading about, the backwards one. If anyone finds this, do not look directly at folio 23 verso after midnight. The ink moves when you're not watching, and when you do, a wet sound, sudden, like a cork pulled from a bottle under pressure, then a voice that was not Johann's, deeper, layered, as though 7 throats spoke at once in perfect unison. It used no language I recognized, yet every syllable landed in my skull, fully translated. Welcome to the turning, little scribe. Your predecessor screamed beautifully. We are still learning the pitch of yours. The tape kept running for another 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Nothing but breathing, not human, and the soft, rhythmic click of something jointed testing the inside of the microphone grill. I sat in my room until the Roman dawn came gray through the shutters. My own reflection in the window looked normal. For now. 2 days later, I went back down and tried to return the cassettes. The locker was gone, not emptied, gone. The wall was smooth tufa, no seam, no biometric plate, as if locker 47 had never existed. I ran my hand across the stone. It was warm, somewhere behind it. Something scratched once, patient. I still have the tapes. They're in a lead-lined box under my bed in the Abruzzo house I fled to. Sometimes, when the wind is wrong, I hear them playing without batteries, and every time I pass a mirror now, I count. Just to be sure, there's only one of me. Chapter 4, The Night the Candles Breathed. The blackout came without warning, the way grace sometimes leaves a soul. It was a Thursday in late October, the air above ground crisp with the first real bite of autumn. But down in level black, the climate controls never allowed seasons. I had been at my desk for hours, cross-referencing Regensburg's final tape against a marginal note in Codex Umbra. So 17 that only appeared under infrared, something about Custodes Reversi, the reversed guardians, watchers who had once been angels, but chose to look away with the one who turned. The note was written in a hand so small it required a 10x loop. Letters that seemed to writhe when you tried to focus on more than one at a time. At Sodom 2.13 the lights died, not flickered, not dimmed, as it simply ceased, as if someone had pulled the concept of electricity out of the walls. The LEDs, the UV lamps, the soft glow from the servers, gone. The negative pressure fans spun down with a dying wail of a sigh, and for the first time in my years below, I heard the true silence of the Vatican's underbelly, the slow drip of condensation somewhere far off, the faint creak of tufa settling under the weight of 2 millennia, and my own pulse in my ears like a trapped moth. Emergency protocol is automatic. Redundancy batteries should kick in within 4 seconds. They didn't. I sat in absolute black, the kind that has texture, thick velvet, pressing against the eyeballs. My hand found the tactical flashlight clipped to my belt. We all carry them, even priests. But when I thumbed the switch, nothing. Dead. I smelled ozone then, sharp and metallic, the way the air tastes before lightning. That's when the first candle lit itself. It was to my left. On shelf, Gamma 12, where the 14th century apocalyptic commentaries live. A beeswax taper in a brass holder I had never noticed before. The flame didn't bloom the way fire does. It unfolded, petal by slow petal, from a wick that had been cold a heartbeat earlier. The light was wrong, too blue at the core, too steady, no flicker from drafts that no longer existed. Then the second, directly across the room, shelf Omicron 3, same impossible ignition. Then a third, a fourth. They appeared in sequence, not random, but following the golden ratio spiral. If you mapped the archive's floor plan, I knew because I had memorized the layout the way sailors once memorized stars. Each flame cast just enough light to reveal the next candle waiting in the dark, unburned, patient. Within 90 seconds, I was inside a perfect circle of fire. 33 candles, 33. The age of Christ at the Passion ringed my desk at exact intervals. The heat should have been stifling in the enclosed space, but the air grew colder, as if the flames were drinking warmth instead of giving it. My breath plumed white. I stood slowly. The chair rolled back and stopped on its own, as though an invisible hand had caught it. Between the shelves, something moved, not walked, flowed, with the wrong number of joints. I saw it first as absence, a gap in the candlelight where light should have been but wasn't. Then the shape resolved, tall, robed, maybe, but the cloth hung backward, folds opening the wrong direction like film run in reverse. The limbs, too many elbows, knees bending forward and back at once, made a soft clicking as it navigated the narrow aisles. It didn't hurry. It didn't need to. The circle was complete. I was the period at the end of its sentence. I should have prayed. The words were there, drilled into me since childhood. Sub tuum praesidium, Pater Noster, the Jesus prayer on loop. But my tongue felt thick, coated in the same wax that now burned without consuming the candles. The thing paused at the edge of the circle, just beyond the nearest flame, where a face should have been. There was only smoothness at first, like marble polished by centuries of blind fingers. Then the skin parted, not cut, not torn, but unfolded from the center outward. No blood, no bone visible, just darkness inside. And in that darkness, eyes, not two, dozens, arranged in spirals that hurt to follow because the retina wants order, and this was order of a kind that predated eyes. They looked at me all at once, every single one. I felt the gaze like pressure behind my own eyes. A migraine made of recognition. These were the custodes reversi the codex mentioned, the guardians who turned with the angel, who chose to watch the abyss rather than the throne. They had been waiting under Saint Peter's since before Peter himself was dust, bound by a rite no one remembered performing, and no one knew how to unperform. One of the eyes blinked, sideways. The clicking resumed. It stepped into the circle. The flames bowed, not flickered, bowed, as if in reverence. The temperature plummeted so fast the condensation on the walls flash froze into delicate ferns of ice. My cassock stiffened. The thing came closer, joints hyperextending with wet pops that echoed like rosary beads dropped on stone. It smelled of turned pages and cold incense, the scent of a church no one has entered since the fall of Constantinople. I backed up until the desk edge bit into my thighs. My hand found the silver basin, empty tonight, because I hadn't bled in weeks. I had thought that was progress. The guardian raised a hand. The fingers were too long, nails yellowed like old vellum, and where the palm should have been, there was a mouth, not metaphorical, a real mouth, vertical, lined with tiny teeth shaped like the uncials in Carolingian manuscripts. It opened. No sound came out at first, only breath that carried the chill of interstellar space. Then it spoke, not with voice, but directly into the bone behind my ears. The way Regensburg's tapes had hinted, you read what was not written for eyes that face forward. The words weren't English, weren't Latin, but I understood them perfectly. Each syllable left a bruise inside my skull. We have watched you watching us, watching him who turned. The mouth in the palm smiled. The teeth spelled something I couldn't quite read. You will turn with us, little scribe, or we will turn you. It reached for my face. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the nearest candle, hot wax spilling over my knuckles like molten gold, and thrust it into the circle's center, breaking the ring. The reaction was immediate. Every flame inverted. The fire sank into the wicks, sucking light downward, creating 33 perfect columns of darkness that swallowed their own illumination. The guardian recoiled as if burned by absence itself, joints cracking in protest. The eyes spiraled faster, panicked, and for a heartbeat I saw fear in them, ancient, alien fear. Then the emergency generators kicked in. Harsh white LEDs slammed on overhead. The candles were gone. No wax on the floor, no scorch marks, only the smell of extinguished matches and something sweeter underneath, like lilies left too long in a tomb. The shelves were empty, but on my desk, arranged in a perfect circle around the open codex, lay 33 drops of frozen blood, mine. I knew by the taste when I touched one to my tongue, copper and fear, and in the margin of folio 23 verso, new words had appeared in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing them. They walk backwards, so they can see what is coming. I looked up at the security camera in the corner. The red light was steady, recording. Later, when I played back the footage, the circle of candles was there. The guardian was there. But in every frame where its face should have been, the image was reversed. Left became right, up became down, as if the camera itself had been forced to look away. I never worked alone after that night, but solitude, I learned, is not measured by the number of bodies in a room. Chapter 5: The Exorcist Who Never Left. I stopped sleeping after the candles, not in the dramatic way people imagine. No thrashing nightmares or waking screams, just a quiet refusal. My body would lie down. The lights in my apartment above the Borgo would go off, and my mind would stay awake, replaying the circle of inverted flames, the mouth in the palm, the way the guardian's joints clicked like a rosary made of bone. 3 hours a night became 2, then 1, then none. The human brain isn't built for that. Hallucinations start around day 9, shadows lengthening the wrong way, Latin words appearing on steamed mirrors that spelled my name backward. By the second week of November, the bleeding came back worse than before. Not just the nose, ears, corners of the eyes. Once from the nail beds when I gripped a pen too hard. The silver basin in my office filled faster than I could empty it. Ricci noticed. Of course he did. The man notices everything except what matters. "You're compromising the materials," he said one morning, voice flat as the marble floors above us. He didn't look at the blood. He looked at my hands shaking over the codex. "Either you bring in containment, or we reassign you to surface cataloging, permanently." Surface cataloging, the Vatican equivalent of a desk in Siberia. I asked for Father Matteo Lupo, the way a drowning man asks for a rope. Everyone in the Curia knows the name, even if they pretend not to. Officially, he's attached to the Diocese of Rome as a special consultant on spiritual disturbances. Unofficially, he's the man you call when a convent starts speaking in Sumerian or a cardinal wakes up with stigmata that spell phone numbers. Ex Reparto San Marco, Italian Special Forces, the unit that doesn't exist on paper. Rumor says he left after an operation in Helmand Province went wrong. Something about a village that wasn't on any map, and children who aged backward when you looked at them too long. The church gave him a collar instead of a court-martial. Some doors only open from the inside. He arrived at the Cortile della Pina entrance at 23:11 exactly. No escort, no luggage except a black leather valise, older than most nations. Tall, maybe 45, face all angles and scar tissue hidden under 3 days of stubble. Eyes the color of glacier water, pale, depthless, impossible to lie to. When he shook my hand, his grip was dry and warm, and I felt the calluses of a man who still trains with garrote wire. "You're the one bleeding on forbidden books," he said, not a question. We didn't speak in the elevator. The cage dropped with its usual hymn of cables. But Matteo stood perfectly still, feet planted like he was on a boat in heavy seas. When the doors opened to level black, he inhaled once, slow, through the nose. "Smells like old fear down here," he murmured, "and something older." I took him straight to the sub-vault where the iron box waited. It had arrived 2 days earlier, via sealed courier from the Castel Sant'Angelo archives, protocol for anything classified ad diabolum pertinens. pertaining to the devil. The box was small, no bigger than a violin case, forged from black iron banded with silver that had tarnished to the color of dried blood. The lock was a Vatican key from the 18th century, the kind with 7 wards and a hollow stem once filled with holy water. The seal was intact, red Spanish wax impressed with the umbraculum of Pope Clement III's 1743. Ricci had left orders, open it only with an exorcist present. He didn't say why. Matteo set the valise on the steel table and snapped it open. Inside, nested in oilskin, a purple stole faded almost gray, a small bottle of Jordan River water, a Roman ritual from 1614 with pages soft as cloth, and a combat knife with a rosewood handle. He didn't explain the knife. He didn't need to. We worked in silence. I read the inventory slip aloud, Latin, of course, while he traced the sigils etched around the lid with one finger. His lips moved, barely. I caught fragments. The Athanasian Creed, backward, child, he said finally, male, approximately 7 years old at death, Rome, 1740, accused of witchcraft by the Holy Office, executed by strangulation after refusing to name his master. Mouth sewn shut post-mortem with gold thread spun from melted papal tiaras and blessed by Clement himself. The thread was meant to bind the tongue that spoke the 7 forbidden names. He looked at me then, glacier eyes unreadable. You ready to hear what a 7-year-old boy learned in 1740 that scared the Inquisition so badly they used gold instead of hemp? I wasn't, but I nodded. Matteo donned the stole. He didn't bother with holy water. He unscrewed the knife handle and poured a thin stream of chrism oil across the seal. The wax hissed like it was alive. Then he inserted the Vatican key, his own, I realized, not mine, and turned it clockwise 3 times, counterclockwise 7. The lock opened with a sound like a sigh from something very tired. The lid was heavy. We lifted together. Inside, wrapped in papal bulls yellowed to the color of old teeth, lay the skeleton, small, delicate, the bones of a child who never reached his growth spurt. The wrappings were decrees from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, excommunications, anathemas, the usual bureaucratic cruelty of the 18th century. But the bulls weren't wrapped around the body to protect it. They were restraints, nailed through the parchment into the bones at wrists and ankles. The nails were silver, consecrated. The skull was turned slightly to the left, as if the child had been trying to look away when they killed him. The jaw hung open just enough to reveal the gold thread, 7 strands, twisted into a single cord, entering and exiting the lips in perfect X stitches. The thread still gleamed, untouched by time. You could see the tiny hallmarks where Clement's ring had pressed the molten metal flat. Matteo's voice was soft. They used gold because iron rusts and silver tarnishes. Gold endures. They wanted the binding to last forever. He took a pair of surgical scissors from the valise, sterling silver, blessed. The handles worn smooth by decades of use. He hesitated. Once I cut this, there's no putting it back. The church has kept this tongue silent for 282 years. You sure you want to know what it has to say? I thought of the guardian in the candle circle. I thought of Regensburg's exploded eardrums. I thought of my own blood feeding the codex like communion. Cut it. Matteo began at the left corner of the mouth. The scissors made a sound like tearing silk. 1 stitch, 2. The gold thread parted reluctantly, each severed strand curling back like a dying spider leg. At the 4th stitch, the temperature in the vault dropped 20 degrees in a heartbeat. My breath fogged. The LEDs overhead flickered, though the power was steady. At the 7th stitch, the thread snapped with a crack like a gunshot. The screaming started. It wasn't sound at first. It was pressure, a wall of grief and rage slamming into us from inside the skull. Then the languages came, layered, overlapping, impossible for one throat. Classical Sumerian, words that tasted like dust and starlight. Old Egyptian, the dialect of the heretic pharaohs. Akkadian curses, sharp as obsidian, a form of Etruscan no scholar has ever transcribed. Punic, the tongue Carthage took to the grave, something that might have been pre-Indo-European. All glottal stops and throat clicks, and beneath them all, Latin, not church Latin, but the raw street Latin of the Subura slums, the kind slaves and whores used when the legions weren't listening. The skeleton didn't move, the jaw stayed slack, but the voice poured out of that tiny sewn mouth like a flood. 7 rivers of hatred braided together. The papal bulls flared into blue flame without burning. The silver nails glowed red hot, and the temperature swung violently from Arctic to furnace and back again. Matteo was already moving. He slammed the lid of the valise shut. No. Wait. He'd grabbed the ritual. Pages flipped themselves to the 1614 rite of exorcism, the old one, before they softened the language in 1999. He began reading in a voice that cut through the screaming like a blade. Exorcizo te, immundissim spiritus. The screaming answered in all 7 tongues at once, a polyphonic howl that made the steel table levitate 6 inches and crash back down. My ears popped. Blood streamed from both nostrils, hot and sudden. The child's skull turned slowly, bones grinding through no muscle remained, to look directly at me. Its eye sockets were empty, but I felt the weight of a gaze older than Rome. Then it spoke 1 sentence in perfect modern Italian, the voice of a frightened little boy. They're still hungry, Father Elias, and you've been feeding them. Matteo threw the Jordan water where it touched the gold thread. The metal blackened and smoked. The screaming peaked into a single sustained note that shattered every light bulb in the vault. Darkness swallowed us. In the dark, I heard the scissors hit the floor. When the emergency strips finally came on, pale and sickly, the skeleton was sitting upright in the box. The gold thread lay in neat coils on the table, like shed snakeskin. The papal bulls were ash and carved into the iron lid, fresh as if done with a fingernail, were 7 words, 1 in each language. I only recognized the Latin, audivimus faciam aversum. We have heard the backwards face. Matteo was bleeding from the ears, just like Regensburg, but he was smiling, thin and terrible. Congratulations, Elias, he said, wiping blood with the purple stole. You just promoted me from consultant to permanent attachment. He never left level black after that night. Neither did the screaming. It followed us both. Faint as a whisper behind every page I turned, and sometimes, when the archives are quiet, I still hear that child's voice asking the question no exorcist has ever answered. If the angels can turn away from God, what's to stop God from turning away from us? Chapter 6, the map room that wasn't on any blueprint. The screaming never really stopped. It just learned to hide after the iron box. Mateo and I worked in shifts, never alone, always with the purple stole draped over the back of a chair like a warning flag. The child's voice lingered in the vents, a faint echo in 7 dead languages that surfaced when the air recyclers cycled, sometimes a whisper asking for water, sometimes a curse sharp enough to make the fluorescent tubes buzz. We sealed the skeleton in a new reliquary lined with lead and pages from the 1614 ritual, but the damage was done. The archives felt awake now, aware of us the way a cat is aware of mice that have finally noticed the claws. Ricci pretended nothing had changed. He sent memos about humidity levels and upcoming digitization projects, but the red phone rang more often, always at times when no one should have been calling. Mateo answered once. He listened for 30 seconds, face unreadable, then hung up and said, "Wrong number," in a voice that made it clear the caller hadn't been human. We needed answers the codex wouldn't give. The text had started resisting translation, letters rearranging themselves into spirals that induced vertigo, margins filling with my own handwritings describing dreams I hadn't had yet. Mateo suggested we stop reading and start looking for what had been hidden physically. Words lie, he said, cleaning the rosewood knife with a silk cloth. Stone remembers. He found the door by accident, or what passes for accident down there. It was behind the profane museum, a cramped storage room off Corridor 12, where the Vatican keeps objects too dangerous for public display, but too sacred to destroy. Fragments of the true cross that bleed on Good Friday. A mirror said to have belonged to Pope Sylvester II that shows the viewer's death. Idols from the New World, smeared with what might be chocolate or might be something older. The room is cataloged, mapped, photographed annually. But Mateo, tracing the walls with his fingertips the way soldiers check for tripwires, felt a draft where no draft should be. A section of shelving swung inward on hidden pivots, silent, oiled, the mechanism medieval but flawless. Behind it, a narrow staircase spiraling down, cut from the living tufa, steps worn concave by feet that had walked them centuries before Christ was born. The air that rose from below was warmer, humid, carrying the mineral tang of underground rivers and something sweeter, myrrh, or rotting flesh. We descended without flashlights at first. The walls glowed faintly, phosphorescent lichen or something cultivated, veins of soft green light pulsing like capillaries. 30 steps, 50. The staircase ended at a bronze door, small, Etruscan in style, no handle, only a depression in the shape of a human hand, right hand, palm forward, fingers splayed. Mateo placed his own hand there without hesitation. The metal was warm, almost feverish. The door swung inward on its own. The chamber beyond was spherical, perfect, maybe 20 meters across. No corners, no edges. The curve seamless as the inside of an egg. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with maps. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, stretched and tanned human skin. Pale and hairless, stitched together with sinew thread. They didn't hang. They were part of the wall, fused somehow. The epidermis still supple enough to catch the faint light and throw it back in sickly pearls. The ink was blood, some arterial bright, some venous dark, drawn with quills that had left microscopic scratches you could feel if you ran a fingertip across the surface. Every map showed the same place, the Vatican Hill, but not as it is now, not even as it was in any historical era. The topographies shifted depending on the angle of view. From the doorway, St. Peter's Basilica stood atop a perfect pyramid, Egyptian in proportion. Step left, and the pyramid became a ziggurat, terraced, with 7 levels corresponding to the 7 hills of Rome. Step right, and the entire hill was hollow, a vast necropolis of catacombs that extended downward in fractal spirals, deeper than geology allowed. Matteo whispered the obvious. Nicaea maps, descent charts, the kind Orpheus would have needed. We moved deeper. The floor was a single slab of black marble veined with gold. Inlaid with a compass, rows that pointed not north, but inward, toward the center of the sphere. At the center stood a lectern carved from a single piece of meteoritic iron, the surface pitted and glassy. On it lay an open atlas, thicker than any book has a right to be, pages of skin so thin they were translucent, illuminated from beneath by a light source we couldn't find. I approached first. The maps on the wall rippled as I passed, as if breathing. One section caught my eye, a detailed plan of the excavations under the basilica, the scaviture level where Peter's bones are meant to be. But in this version, the bones weren't human, they were longer, jointed wrong, curled around something that looked like an eye the size of a shield. Then the geography began to change in real time. I blinked, couldn't help it, and when my eyes opened, the pyramid was gone. In its place rose a mound of skulls, millions, arranged with mathematical precision. The dome of St. Peter's balanced atop them like a crown. Blink again, the hill inverted, becoming a pit. The basilica hanging upside down from chains of gold that disappeared into darkness. The changes weren't random. They followed a pattern tied to heartbeat, to breath, to the exact second between blinks when the soul is technically blind. Matteo's voice came from behind me. Low, don't trust your eyes. They're showing you what you already fear. But it was worse than that. The sphere had no mirrors, no reflective surfaces at all, until I looked down at the black marble floor. My reflection stared back, cassock pristine, face exactly as it had been the day I took my oath. Then the reflection aged, not gradually, in jumps. 10 years every 60 seconds. The hair grayed at the temples, then receded. Wrinkles carved themselves around the eyes, the mouth. The skin sagged, liver spots blooming like mold. By the time I had counted to 5, the reflection was 60, 70, 80, stooped, trembling, the Roman collar hanging loose on a neck thin as a bird's. I jerked backward. The reflection didn't follow. It stayed there, trapped in the marble, smiling with teeth that had gone yellow and sharp. Matteo grabbed my arm, his grip the only thing that felt solid. It's feeding, he said. Every blink, every heartbeat, the room is digesting time. We turned to leave, but the bronze door had vanished. Seamless wall where the exit had been. The maps were changing faster now. The Vatican Hill collapsing inward, folding like paper, revealing layer after layer of older cities, pagan Rome, Etruscan shrines, something pre-human with angular script that hurt to perceive. The air thickened, tasting of copper and frankincense. I felt it then, the pull, not gravity, something hungrier. My reflection in the floor was ancient now, skeletal, but still smiling. It raised one withered hand and pressed it against the underside of the marble, as if trying to push through. Matteo dragged me toward the lectern. "The atlas," he said. "It's the key. Everything in here is anchored to it." The open page showed a map of the sphere itself, drawn from the inside out. In the center, two tiny figures, one in a cassock, one in a faded purple stole, stood exactly where we were standing. As I watched, the ink figure of me aged in real time, matching the reflection below. The Matteo figure didn't change. Something about the stole, or the man wearing it, resisted. He flipped the page himself. The next map was blank, fresh skin, untanned, still pink at the edges. A single drop of blood welled from the center, forming a perfect circle that spread into the outline of a door. Matteo didn't hesitate. He sliced his palm with the rosewood knife and pressed it to the page. The blood soaked in instantly. The wall rippled, and the bronze door reappeared, exactly where it had been, as if it had never left. We ran. The staircase was longer going up, or time was stretching. My knees buckled twice. Each time I looked down, the reflection in the polished bronze steps had caught up a little more. By the top, I was gasping like an old man, hair coming out in clumps when I touched it. We burst into the profane museum. The hidden door swung shut behind us with a sound like a coffin lid. Matteo leaned against the wall, bleeding hand wrapped in the stole. His face was gray. "How long were we in there?" I asked. He checked his watch, an old military analog. No battery. The hands hadn't moved. 7 minutes, he said. I looked in the small mirror above the sink where we washed relics. The face staring back was mine again. 38. Tired. But mine. Only the eyes were older. Much older. On the floor behind us, a single drop of blood had seeped under the false shelving. It was already drying into the shape of a key. The maps were still down there, redrawing themselves, waiting for the next blink. Chapter 7. The Night of the Reversed Mass. The reversal began with time itself. I remember the exact moment because Matteo was cleaning his knife again, the rosewood handle catching the harsh light of the desk lamp while he recited the minor exorcism under his breath like a habit he couldn't break. We were back in the main reading room after sealing the map chamber door with every ward we knew: salt lines, holy water, pages from the ritual taped over the seams. It was a temporary fix, the kind soldiers use on a leaking boat. The air still tasted wrong, thick with the copper residue of the child's screaming and the sweet rot from the skin maps below. At 21:17 precisely, Matteo's watch, my phone, the atomic clock on the wall server, all of them chimed midnight. Not rang, not buzzed, chimed 12 slow, deliberate strokes from mechanisms that hadn't used bells in 50 years. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, layered as if every clock in the Vatican city-state had decided to speak at once. The tufa walls vibrated with it, a deep bronze resonance that made the fillings in my teeth ache. Dust sifted from the ceiling in perfect circles. Matteo froze mid-stroke, knife half-sheathed. "That's not possible," he said, but we both knew better by then. The red phone rang. Once. I picked it up out of reflex. Static. Then a voice, not Ricci's, not human, whispering the canon of the Mass backward in Koine Greek. The words slurred like a tape played in reverse. I slammed the receiver down. The phone kept ringing, even unplugged. We ran. The corridors were wrong, not twisted, wrong in direction. We turned left toward the elevator and found ourselves facing the way we'd come. The motion sensors triggered in sequence ahead of us, LEDs blooming like eyes opening. But the path looped. Matteo drew the knife. I clutched the small reliquary vial of the child's gold thread we'd salvaged. Now blackened and twisted, footsteps echoed behind us, bare feet on stone, soft, unhurried, multiplied by dozens. We burst into the service tunnel that connects level black to the foundations of St. Peter's. The footsteps stopped. Silence rushed in like water filling a sunk ship. Then the singing began, not singing, unsinging. The canon again, but reversed, starting from the final doxology and unraveling backward through the consecration. The words of institution, the epiclesis, ancient Greek, the dialect of the Septuagint, pronounced with perfect Byzantine intonation, but running in retrograde. The voices were male, olds, resonant, the sound of a choir that had practiced for centuries and finally gotten the order wrong on purpose. We climbed the maintenance stairs 2 at a time, emerging through a grate behind the high altar of the basilica. The public lights were off, only the vigil lamps burned, red glass flickering like dying stars. The nave stretched empty, moonlight slicing through the windows in silver blades. But the singing was louder now, coming from the Sistine Chapel direction. Matteo grabbed my sleeve. They're processing. We moved along the shadowed colonnade, staying low. The chapel doors, massive bronze, usually locked after hours, stood ajar. From within spilled a glow the color of arterial blood under blacklight. We slipped inside. The frescoes hit me first. Michelangelo's Last Judgment, restored to brilliance, but wrong. The damned in the lower right were weeping blood, real blood, welling from the painted eyes of the sinners, running in thick rivulets down the wall, pooling on the floor without soaking in. The blessed above looked serene still, but their halos had dimmed, as if the light itself was being rationed. In the center of the chapel, dozens of cardinals in scarlet robes walked backward in perfect synchronization, not shuffled, walked. Heels first, spines arched unnaturally, chasubles trailing like spilled wine. Their faces were visible only in flashes as they turned, men I recognized from the Curia, from papal conclaves, eyes milk white, mouths moving in reverse recitation. They formed a spiral procession, entering through the main doors and exiting through the side toward the Pauline Chapel, but always backward, as if time had inverted just for them. The air reeked of myrrh and ozone, the same smell from the map chamber. The marble floor reflected them upside down, but the reflections walked forward, normal, as if the real cardinals were the echoes. Matteo's lips moved silently, Saint Michael prayer. I think he pulled me into the corner behind the cantoria, the musicians' gallery. We crouched in shadow. One cardinal broke from the spiral, Cardinal Bellini, the Secretary of State, face I'd seen on television 100 times. He glided, no other word, backward toward the altar, arms raised in what would have been the elevation of the host if time ran right. On the altar lay a chalice, but inverted, mouth down, wine dripping upward into it from invisible air. The host beside it was black, moldy, crawling with something pale and segmented. The reversed cannon reached the words of consecration. The chapel shook. Cracks spidered across the ceiling fresco, the creation of Adam, but God's finger reaching toward Adam recoiled, pulling away, the spark of life reversing into nothingness. Blood from the damned's eyes began to flow in streams now, forming sigils on the floor, the same backwards key from the codex, repeated in wet crimson. Matteo stood. Enough. He stepped into the open, purple stole vivid against the red sea of cardinals. His voice cut through the unsinging like a bell in fog. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, ego te separo. The rite of separation, the old one, forbidden since 1958, meant to sever a place from the demonic, not a person. He began in Latin, voice steady, knife in one hand, ritual in the other. The cardinals faltered, their backward steps stuttered. One by one they turned, not gracefully, but with the jerkiness of marionettes whose strings had been cut, facing him now, white eyes fixing on the stole. The blood sigils bubbled. Matteo didn't stop. He traced the air with the knife, carving pentagrams that hung glowing, reciting the clauses of banishment. The chapel lights, emergency strips, exploded in showers of sparks. The reversed cardinals opened their mouths wider than anatomy allowed, and from each throat poured the child's scream, 7 languages braided into a single howl. The fresco bled faster. Christ, the judge in the center, wept blood from his wounds in reverse, flowing back into the nail holes. The spear thrust, closing. Something detached from the procession. A shadow peeled away from the cardinals. Taller, jointed wrong. The guardian from the candle night, but larger now, fed by the right or the reversal. It moved forward while everything else moved back. A single current against the tide. Its palm mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth shaped like backwards keys. Matteo finished the rite with the final clause, Vade retro in nomine Domini. The chapel went silent. The cardinals collapsed like puppets, robes pooling red. The blood on the walls dried instantly, flaking away like rust. The frescoes dimmed to normal. The bleeding stopped. The guardian dissolved into smoke that smelled of lilacs and decay. We stood in the wreckage, breathing hard. Matteo sheathed the knife. "It's done," he said. The separation held. But as we stepped over the fallen bodies, alive, breathing shallow, eyes closed, we didn't see the shadow slip through the closing doors behind us. Didn't notice the way the vigil lamps flickered once, in reverse. We emerged into the Roman night, dawn still hours away, the piazza empty, the obelisk casting a long shadow that pointed the wrong direction. Matteo lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the first time I'd seen him shake. "They'll wake with no memory," he said. "The church will call it mass exhaustion, carbon monoxide, maybe another cover-up." I nodded, too tired to argue. We parted at the edge of the colonnade, he to wherever men like him go when the job is finished, me to my apartment to burn the cassock I'd worn that night. But something followed me home. I noticed it first in the bathroom mirror, a second reflection, half a heartbeat behind, smiling when I didn't. Then the clocks in my apartment began chiming midnight at odd hours, And sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear footsteps in the hallway, bare, soft, multiplied, walking backward toward me. Chapter 8: Why I Burned My Cassock and Disappeared. They told the world I died on a rain-slick road outside Orvieto. The official story was simple, clean, the way the Vatican likes them. Father Elias Moretti, 38, promising paleographer, lost control of his Fiat Punto on the A1 at 4:12 a.m., 17th of November, 2023. Vehicle rolled 3 times, burst into flames, body burned beyond recognition, dental records confirmed. The Archbishop of Perugia celebrated the funeral mass in a side chapel of the Duomo. Only 12 people attended, mostly archive staff who knew better than to ask why the casket was sealed. I watched the broadcast on a cracked television in a bar in Pescara, nursing an anonymous grappa while the news anchor spoke my obituary with the same tone she used for minor earthquakes. My photograph, smiling, young, collar crisp, flashed on screen for 7 seconds. Then they cut to weather. I paid cash and walked out into the salt wind off the Adriatic. The beard was new then, the hair longer. The name on my fake permesso di soggiorno, Luca Ferraro, born in Cosenza. No priors, still felt borrowed. I kept walking until the coast road turned inland, up into the Gran Sasso, until the villages got smaller and the cell signal died, and the only sound at night was wind moving through chestnut trees, like something breathing through teeth. I rented the top floor of a stone house in Santo Stefano di Sassanio, population 112 in summer, maybe 40 in winter. The landlady, an old woman who lost 2 sons to heroin in the 90s, asked no questions when I paid 6 months in advance with crumpled €500 notes. She just crossed herself and said the previous tenant had been a writer who hanged himself from the rafter above the kitchen. He left in a bag, she told me, but the rope is still there if you need it. I laughed. She didn't. The house smells of wood smoke and sheep. I heat with a stove that eats olive prunings and coughs sparks like warnings. There's one room with a table, one chair, one bed that creaks like confession. The windows look east over the valley, where the snow comes early and stays late. I thought distance would be enough. Height, stone, the thin air that makes the stars look close enough to cut your fingers. It wasn't. The first night the mouse moved on its own, I thought it was a rat. The house is old, rats are honest. I was at the desk, second-hand Lenovo, no webcam, Tor browser open to nothing, trying to write down what I remembered before it rewrote itself inside my skull. 3:33 a.m. The digital clock flipped to those numbers with a soft click every insomniac knows too well. The cursor blinked, then it stopped blinking, then it began to draw, slow, deliberate strokes, no input from me. The mouse glided under my hand like it had muscles of its own. I let it. I was too tired to be afraid anymore. The symbol took shape, the backwards key from the palimpsest, the one that appeared under UV after my blood fed the page, but refined now, elegant, the lines curving with a grace that hurt to follow. When it finished, the screen went black except for the drawing, glowing faint blue like bioluminescence. Then the computer shut down. Hard reboot. No trace in the temp files. No log. Just the after image burned onto my retinas when I closed my eyes. It happens every night now. Same time. Same symbol. Sometimes the mouse draws it faster, as if whatever guides it is getting impatient. Once it spelled my real name in the spaces between the lines, Elias, then erased it letter by letter, backward. I have two relics left. The first is a Polaroid I took with Mateo's old camera the night we fled the Sistine Chapel. The flash caught something the human eye missed in the upper left corner, where Michelangelo painted the angels with trumpets. One figure has turned away. Its face is smooth, featureless except for the spiral of eyes on the back of its head. The photograph smells faintly of lilacs, no matter how many times I seal it in plastic when I hold it to the light. The turned angel's eyes follow me. The second is the page I tore from Codex Umbrae 17 in the chaos after the reversed Mass. I didn't plan it. My hand just closed around folio 23 verso as we ran, ripping it free with a sound like skin parting from muscle. The vellum is warm always, warmer than my own flesh, under any light, sun, bulb, moonlight. The overtext is still the boring 8th century commentary on Mark, but in complete darkness, if I press it to my forehead, the undertext glows through my skull, instructions for the final turning, not of the angel, of the reader. I've translated as much as I dare. It says when enough scribes have bled on the page, when enough eyes have looked away out of fear or pride or simple exhaustion. The angel with the backwards face will complete the circle. He will turn all the way around, and when he does, every mirror, every reflection, every polished surface on earth will show what he sees now: the throne empty, the light gone, the darkness that was bound rushing out like breath held for 7 millennia. I burned the cassock the first week here, carried it to the ridge behind the village at dusk, poured lamp oil over the black wool, and lit it with a match from the landlady's kitchen. The flames were the wrong color, green at the edges, blue in the heart. The cloth didn't burn away. It folded in on itself, shrinking, until all that remained was a small square of fabric, no bigger than a postage stamp. Still black, still perfect. I keep it in a tin box under the floorboard with the photograph and the page. Sometimes, when the wind howls down the valley, the box rattles as if something inside is testing the hinges. Mateo never contacted me again. I heard through encrypted channels, old habits from men who once wore different uniforms, that he was found in the Tiber 6 months later, face down, lungs full of water that tasted of myrrh when they pumped him out. The official cause, suicide. The unofficial one, whispered in the bars near Reggio Parco, where the exorcists drink. He cut his own eyes out with the rosewood knife before he jumped. They never found the eyes. I don't go to Mass anymore. The village church is locked most days anyway. The priest comes from Novelli once a month, hungover and hurried, but on feast days when the bells ring. I hear them backward, the bronze notes unraveling into the reversed canon that still plays sometimes in my dreams. People here think I'm a hermit recovering from a bad divorce. They leave bread and cheese on the doorstep when the snow blocks the road. They're kind. They don't know that every morning I check the mirrors. There are 3 in the house, and count the reflections. So far, only one of me. But some days the smile comes half a second too late. Last week, the mouse drew something new. After the backwards key, it added 7 tiny figures around the edge, stick people holding hands, one by one, starting from the left. They erase themselves. There are now 4 left. I think one of them is me. If you're listening to this, really listening, do me a favor. Next time you're in a church, any church, look at the crucifix. Look close. See if Christ's head has started to turn, even a fraction, away from the nails, away from the wound, away from you, because they didn't lock those texts away to protect the world from them. They locked them away to protect them from us. Some things down there are still hungry, and hunger, like grace, can wait forever.